chosen one. Before you hear the rest of this, I want you to pause for a moment and settle yourself. Find a place where you can be fully present, because what I'm about to share is not something meant to be heard while your attention is divided between a dozen different things. There are moments in life that quietly change everything, moments that separate who you were from who you are becoming. This feels like one of those moments. One day, you may look back on this season and realize it was the point where the entire direction of your life began to shift. The reason I am asking you to slow down is simple. Part of you already senses that something is happening. Your spirit has been picking up on it long before your mind could explain it, and sometimes the body needs stillness before it can receive what the heart already knows. You've felt it, haven't you? For weeks, maybe even longer. There has been a subtle awareness beneath the surface of your everyday life. It is difficult to describe and even harder to explain to someone else, yet it remains there, quietly present. Like the atmosphere changing before a storm arrives, there has been a growing sense that something is building, just beyond what your eyes can see. What you have been feeling is not simply nervousness or uncertainty. It is anticipation searching for a name. Deep within you, there is an awareness that movement is taking place, and the tension you carry comes from standing between what your spirit already senses and what has not fully appeared in front of you yet. Something is being rearranged behind the scenes, making room for a season that is preparing to enter your life. You have probably noticed signs of that shift already. Certain relationships have changed shape. Familiar chapters have come to an end, and things that once felt meaningful no longer satisfy you in the same way. What looks like disruption often feels uncomfortable while it is happening. But sometimes life creates space because something new is preparing to arrive. The losses and transitions you have been grieving may actually be evidence that the process has already begun. I want to speak carefully here, because many people have learned to associate change with pain. When enough disappointments accumulate over the years, even good news can feel suspicious. Part of you expects every blessing to come with a hidden cost because that has been your experience for so long. Yet what is approaching now carries a different weight, and it may arrive in a form larger than anything you imagined when you first prayed for it. If something inside you is responding to these words, if hope just stirred in a place that has been quiet for a long time, take a moment and affirm it. Comment the words, "I am ready for big," not because those words change anything outside of you, but because they remind the deeper part of you that it is safe to expect good things again. Let your own voice speak readiness where disappointment once lived. The truth about life-changing moments is that they rarely arrive the way ordinary changes do. Small adjustments announce themselves gradually, but the changes that transform an entire season often seem to emerge all at once after long periods of silence. First comes the waiting, the wondering, the feeling that nothing is moving, then suddenly more shifts in a short time than you thought possible. So if this season has felt painfully slow, that is not evidence that nothing is happening. In many cases, it is the very environment that exists right before everything begins to move. But there is something important you need to understand. Sometimes people stand at the edge of the very thing they have been praying for and still struggle to step into it. Not because they lack worthiness, but because something within them has grown tired from the journey. We will come back to that in a moment. For now, I want you to hold on to a question. What if the distance between you and the change you sense approaching has never been about a lack of faith or a lack of readiness? What if there is simply something within you that has been waiting to be restored? Before we go further, you need to understand why this season is unfolding now and not years ago. The timing is carrying meaning, even if it has felt confusing. There have been signs all around you, dreams that linger long after you wake up. Repeated words, numbers, or moments that seem to appear again and again until they feel impossible to ignore. Beneath all of it has been a quiet urge to prepare, to clear space, to simplify, and to make room for something you cannot fully explain. That inner prompting is meaningful. It resembles the feeling of preparing a home before an expected guest arrives. You may not see them yet, but something within you already knows to make room. You have probably noticed yourself becoming more sensitive as well, more reflective, more emotional, perhaps even closer to tears than usual. There is nothing wrong with that. A heart often becomes softer before it is asked to carry something greater. The tenderness you have felt is not weakness. It is preparation. The very places that feel exposed right now are becoming capable of holding a blessing that requires openness rather than resistance. What feels fragile today may actually be creating the capacity you will need for what is ahead. And maybe the question that has followed you through all these years is why it took so long. Why the promise seemed delayed. Why you had to endure seasons that appeared empty while the life you hoped for remained just beyond reach. There is an answer to that question, and it has the power to change how you see the entire journey. The reason it could not arrive earlier is because you were still becoming the person who could carry it. Some things enter our lives only after we have developed the strength, wisdom, and capacity to hold them well. What felt like delay was often preparation happening beneath the surface, shaping you into someone ready for what is now approaching. A blessing that arrives before you have the strength to carry it rarely feels like a blessing for long. When something life-changing comes too early, it can overwhelm the very person it was meant to help. Real transformation requires capacity, and capacity is usually formed over time through experiences that shape your character, deepen your wisdom, and strengthen your foundation. Think about the opportunities you once wanted so desperately. Some of them would have felt like answers back then, yet they may have carried more weight than the version of you at that time could have handled. The years between who you were and who you have become were never empty years. They were years of construction, shaping someone capable of receiving what once would have been too much. The pressure you carried was not evidence that you were being punished. It was evidence that something was being built. There are answers that look beautiful from a distance, but would have wounded you if they had arrived before you were ready. And true mercy sometimes looks like preparation before fulfillment. I want you to receive this deeply. The length of your waiting season often reveals the size of what it is preparing you for. Small assignments require little preparation, but the things that reshape an entire life and influence the people connected to it tend to demand a deeper process. If your journey has felt unusually long or unusually intense, consider the possibility that it reflects the significance of what is ahead. No one pours a massive foundation for something small. The deeper the groundwork, the greater the structure it is intended to support. What you interpreted as delay may have been evidence that something larger was being prepared than you could see at the time. I know there were seasons when frustration whispered that maybe you misunderstood everything. Maybe the dream was never real. Maybe the promise belonged to someone else. Yet despite all of those thoughts, something within you kept returning to the same hope, even when you tried to walk away from it. That matters more than you realize. Ideas that are built on illusion tend to fade when they stop receiving attention. Yet some callings remain alive through disappointment, setbacks, and years of silence. The reason they endure is because they are rooted deeper than circumstances. They remain because they are connected to something that was planted within you long ago. The fact that you still carry that hope after everything you have lived through says more than your doubts ever could. It is evidence that the story is still unfolding. It is evidence that the change you sense has not disappeared. In many ways, it is evidence that it is closer than you think. If something inside you feels lighter hearing that, pause and acknowledge it. Comment the words, "The weight was building me." Those words carry more truth than they may seem. There comes a moment when you stop fighting your past and begin recognizing how much it contributed to the person you have become. When peace replaces resentment, you create room for what comes next. A heart that has made peace with the process can receive new blessings without carrying old bitterness into them. And that leads to something else I want you to understand. The change approaching your life is not something you must force into existence. For years you may have exhausted yourself trying to push doors open, trying to manufacture outcomes, trying to make things happen through effort alone. Yet some things arrive because their time has come, not because you managed to wrestle them into existence. There is freedom in realizing that your role was never to control the timing. Your role was to become ready when the moment arrived. That understanding allows the nervous striving to soften. It allows you to stop reaching from desperation and begin receiving from trust. Yet readiness and effort are not the same thing. A person can work tirelessly and still remain unable to recognize what they have been waiting for. Readiness has less to do with how hard you are pushing and more to do with how clearly you are seeing. Years spent in survival mode can create a kind of exhaustion that reaches beyond the body. It can dull your awareness and leave you moving through life with one side of you hoping while another side remains braced for disappointment. Living in that divided state slowly weakens your ability to recognize an answer when it finally arrives. Sometimes people stand inside the very change they prayed for and struggle to recognize it because they have spent so long preparing for loss. The part of them that would normally respond with joy has grown quiet beneath years of fatigue. That is why the question is not whether change is coming. The question is whether you will be present enough to recognize it when it does. We will return to that soon. For now, there is something else you need to carry with you. When a major shift approaches, resistance often grows stronger before it breaks. The final stretch of a long season can feel heavier than everything that came before it. You may notice old doubts becoming louder. You may feel tempted to quit just as hope begins to return. Everything around you may appear more difficult, creating the illusion that progress has stopped. Yet many people misread this moment and mistake increasing pressure for proof that nothing is changing. Listen carefully. Pressure is not always a warning to turn back. Sometimes it is evidence that something new is about to emerge. What feels like everything falling apart can be the final movement before something long awaited finally arrives. So, if recent days have felt unusually difficult, do not assume the promise has disappeared. If hope returned and resistance immediately followed, consider another possibility. Perhaps what you are feeling is not distance from the breakthrough, but proximity to it. Opposition rarely gathers around what carries no significance. The intensity of the struggle often reveals the importance of what stands on the other side. You are not standing in the ruins of your journey. You are standing at a threshold. Hold your ground. Steady your heart. Keep moving forward even if the final stretch feels uncertain. Some of the most important moments arrive when people are tempted to give up one step too soon. And now, allow yourself to imagine what waits beyond this season. Picture a morning not far from now when you wake up and immediately notice something feels different. The heaviness you carried for so long is no longer resting on your chest, and the constant sense of pressure has quietly lifted away. You lie there for a moment and realize you are no longer preparing yourself for another difficult day. Instead, there is a sense of openness, a quiet expectation, a feeling you have not experienced in a very long time. For the first time in years, you are genuinely looking forward to what comes next. That change alone is powerful. The movement from dread into anticipation reshapes a person from the inside out. It is the kind of transformation others can feel around you before you ever find the words to explain it. The shift that is coming will not remain hidden inside your thoughts or feelings. It will begin to show up in the places where you once felt blocked, delayed, or overlooked. The door you spent years pushing against may suddenly open with far less effort than you ever imagined. The answer you struggled to find could arrive through a path you never would have planned for yourself. Sometimes, an entire season changes through one conversation, one unexpected opportunity, one simple moment that redirects everything. People often describe these experiences as sudden, and there is truth in that. After a long season where very little seemed to move, life can begin unfolding so quickly that it feels almost impossible to explain. What took years to prepare can reveal itself in a matter of days. Yet the deepest part of this change is not what happens around you. It is what happens within you. The place that has carried the ache of being forgotten, unseen, or left behind finally begins to heal. The question you have quietly carried for so long, receives an answer, and something inside you settles in a way it never has before. You stop seeing yourself as the person standing outside the story, looking in. You begin to recognize that your life has always been part of something meaningful, even during the seasons that felt silent. That inner shift changes everything, because it transforms the way you interpret your past, your present, and the future unfolding before you. And there is another layer to this that gives the entire journey its purpose. For a long time, you have been the one asking for strength, asking for direction, asking for your own breakthrough. But there comes a moment when the comfort you once needed becomes something you are able to offer others. The wisdom born from your waiting becomes a light for someone still walking through theirs. Nothing you lived through was wasted. The disappointments, the delays, the unanswered questions, and the long stretches of uncertainty all become part of the story you carry. One day, someone will find hope because they see how you survived what once seemed impossible. The change you receive becomes something that reaches beyond you and touches the lives of others. Take a moment and anchor yourself in that future. Comment the words, "Everything is changing." Speak those words from a place of confidence rather than longing. Let them be a declaration that your season is shifting and that you are ready to welcome what has been moving toward you all along. You are not the first person to experience a dramatic turn after a long season of waiting. Throughout life, there are countless stories of people who endured years of disappointment before everything changed in a single, unexpected moment. What looked permanent suddenly became temporary, and what seemed impossible became reality faster than anyone could have predicted. Maybe you know what it feels like to watch others step into the very things you have been hoping for. Maybe there were moments when you wondered if your opportunity had quietly passed by while you were still waiting. Those thoughts are understandable, but they are not the final truth about your story. The length of the waiting season has never determined the speed of the breakthrough. Sometimes the longest chapters are followed by the quickest turns. The years that felt still do not define what can happen next. If anything, they make the transformation more powerful when it finally arrives. You are not becoming a forgotten story. You are becoming a living reminder that change is possible even after long periods of silence. The people who witnessed your struggle may one day witness your restoration as well, and they will see that endurance was never the end of the story. This is why your journey carries meaning beyond your own life. The hope that returns to you has a way of spreading to others. Your breakthrough becomes evidence for someone else who is still waiting, still believing, still wondering if anything will ever change. The impact reaches farther than you can currently see. Earlier, I spoke about the exhausted and divided state that can develop after years of carrying burdens and navigating uncertainty. I promised we would return to that, and now the time has come. You have already seen what prolonged waiting can do to the heart, and you have also seen what becomes possible when a person remains open to what is ahead. The truth is that many sincere people spend years preparing for change while quietly carrying a kind of fatigue they barely recognize. They become so accustomed to surviving that they forget what it feels like to expect good things with an open heart. The challenge is rarely a lack of desire. More often, it is the weariness that accumulates from waiting. When someone has lived in that state for a long time, their attention becomes scattered between hope and self-protection. Part of them wants to move forward, while another part remains guarded against disappointment. That inner division can make it difficult to recognize new opportunities even when they are standing right in front of them. What you have been feeling is real. The exhaustion, the mental noise, the constant effort of carrying responsibilities and navigating uncertainty all leave their mark. Over time, they can create a distance between what you deeply sense and what you allow yourself to believe. And that distance is often where clarity begins to fade. The good news is that weariness is not your identity. It is a condition, and conditions can change. The part of you that once expected possibility, the part that could recognize an open door and move toward it with confidence, is still there beneath the noise. This passage continues toward that realization, inviting you to become present enough to recognize what is already beginning to unfold around you. What I want you to understand is that exhaustion is not the end of your story. When a person spends years carrying disappointment, holding everything together, and trying every method they can think of, there often comes a point where they stop trusting their own ability to feel hope. They still believe in what is possible, but the connection to it feels distant, as though something inside has gone quiet. I have seen people reach that place after long seasons of searching. They prayed, reflected, showed up faithfully, and continued moving forward even when nothing seemed to change. Then, often in the most unexpected way, something began to clear. The heaviness that had become so familiar started lifting, and they realized they were no longer carrying the same inner fog that once followed them everywhere. That kind of change does not happen because a person suddenly becomes stronger or tries harder than before. In many cases, it happens because they finally stop treating their weariness as a personal failure. Instead, they recognize that years of surviving can leave the heart guarded and the mind crowded, and they begin allowing themselves the space to heal. If you have been walking through a season like that, I want you to hear this clearly. There is nothing wrong with you because you feel tired. There is nothing broken about you because clarity has felt difficult to access. Anyone who has carried a heavy burden for a long time knows what it feels like to lose touch with the sense of openness they once had. And yet, beneath all the noise, that part of you still exists, the part that recognizes possibility. The part that senses movement before it becomes visible. The part that can meet a new season with expectation instead of fear. It has not disappeared. It has simply been waiting beneath layers of fatigue. That is why striving alone was never the answer. You cannot force peace into existence through effort, and you cannot pressure your spirit into trust. The more exhausted a person becomes, the more they often mistake constant effort for readiness, when what they truly need is space to become present again. Clarity returns gently. Awareness returns gently. The ability to recognize what is opening before you returns gently. Over time, what once felt rare begins to feel natural again, and what once felt distant begins to feel close. So do not lose sight of the deeper message underneath everything we have discussed. The most important thing was never a method, a technique, or an external solution. The heart of this message has always been about the change already moving toward you and your willingness to meet it with open eyes and an open spirit. If something within you is resonating with that truth, take a moment to acknowledge it. Comment the words, "I am ready to receive." Let those words become a quiet declaration that you are no longer standing at the edge of your next season, expecting disappointment. Instead, you are choosing to become present, available, and ready for what is already beginning to unfold. Now let us return to what truly matters, because the deepest part of this message is still ahead. I want to speak directly to the person you have become, through everything you have endured. You are not someone standing on the sidelines waiting for chance to finally notice you. You are someone who has been shaped through experiences, prepared through challenges, and positioned through circumstances that carried more purpose than you realized at the time. Nothing about your journey has been meaningless. The family you came from, the wounds you learned to survive, the years that tested your patience, and the seasons that seemed to stretch far beyond reason, all contributed to the person you are today. What felt like delay was often development. What felt like being overlooked was often preparation happening beneath the surface, building the strength required for what comes next. There is another reason the process has felt so significant. You may have sensed patterns that seemed to repeat themselves, situations that almost turned around, opportunities that nearly arrived, breakthroughs that appeared close enough to touch before slipping away. Carrying the weight of those experiences can leave a person wondering if things will ever truly change. But perhaps your role has always been larger than you thought. Sometimes, one person's transformation becomes a turning point that reaches beyond their own life. The healing, wisdom, and freedom gained through a difficult journey have a way of touching future relationships, future generations, and people who have not even entered your story yet. That is why some seasons feel so heavy. They are preparing more than a single moment. The change approaching you is not meant to remain hidden. The people who watched you struggle, who saw the long waiting season, who witnessed the moments when you almost gave up, may one day witness the turning point as well. Your story becomes a reminder that silence does not mean abandonment, and that delay does not mean the promise disappeared. Sometimes the deepest preparation happens where no one can see it. While you wait for that season to unfold completely, carry something simple with you. Before the noise of the day begins pulling at your attention, give yourself a few quiet moments to become present. Breathe deeply, allow your thoughts to settle, create space inside yourself instead of immediately preparing for what might go wrong. Too many people spend their lives expecting disappointment before the day has even begun. They become so focused on protecting themselves from loss that they fail to recognize opportunity when it arrives. Meet each morning differently. Meet it with openness, awareness, and a willingness to notice what is being placed before you. And when fear returns, because sometimes it will, do not allow it to become your guide. You do not need to wrestle with it or argue against it endlessly. Simply recognize it for what it is. Say to yourself, "This is fear speaking. This is not the deepest truth of my life." The moment you stop treating fear as reality, its grip begins to loosen. Underneath all the noise, there is a quieter place within you. A place that still remembers hope. There is a steady center that exists beneath the exhaustion, beneath the disappointment, and beneath every story that tried to convince you nothing was changing. That place has been there all along, waiting for you to return to it. I want to leave you with a reminder. There are people who waited so long for things to change that they eventually stopped expecting anything at all. Not because they lost faith completely, but because disappointment became exhausting. Yet sometimes the very season that appears empty becomes the season where everything begins moving. A single opportunity appears, then another follows. What once seemed impossible begins unfolding so naturally that it feels almost unreal. Later, when they look back, they often realize the most surprising part was not that change came. It was how quickly life shifted once they were able to recognize the doors opening before them. That is what transformation often looks like. It is not always dramatic at first. It begins when preparation meets opportunity and when a ready heart recognizes what has arrived. The change does not create the person. The change reveals who the person has been becoming all along. Before we close, I want you to pause and experience this rather than simply hear it. Let your shoulders soften, take a slow breath, and allow yourself to settle into this moment. Imagine your life as a home that has quietly been prepared while you were focused on surviving another day. For a long time, the rooms may have felt familiar, unchanged, and heavy with old expectations. But now, imagine walking through the front door and discovering that something is different. Light is entering places that once felt dim. Pathways that seemed closed now stand open. Possibilities you thought had disappeared are waiting for you with a quiet sense of certainty. Walk through that space in your mind. Allow yourself to feel what it would be like if the season you have hoped for was no longer distant. Let yourself imagine that what has been preparing behind the scenes is finally visible. Stay there for a moment and receive it without rushing away from it. Now take a breath of gratitude. Not forced gratitude, not performative gratitude, but the simple recognition that you made it this far. You survived seasons that could have hardened your heart, and yet some part of you remained open. You kept moving forward even when the path ahead made little sense. And now release what no longer belongs to you. Release the fear that you missed your opportunity. Release the habit of expecting disappointment. Release the exhaustion that came from trying to force outcomes before their time. Picture all of it leaving your hands and falling away from you. As that weight lifts, allow yourself to stand fully in the truth of who you are becoming. Remind yourself that you are not forgotten. Remind yourself that every season carried purpose. Remind yourself that the waiting was shaping you rather than wasting you. And remind yourself that you are ready to receive what has been moving toward you. If these words resonate deeply with you, comment the words, "I received the change." Let those words become a marker in this moment. Let them speak louder than the doubts that have followed you through the waiting season, and carry this final thought with you. What looked like stillness was never emptiness. What felt like silence was never abandonment. Sometimes life gathers itself quietly before a great movement begins. Hold your heart steady, remain open, and stay present, because what is ahead may be greater than you expected, more beautiful than you imagined, and far closer than you realize. Everything is changing, and it is already beginning.